Well, thanks for tuning into my YouTube channel this week, and I guess it should be good to just lay down some groundwork on like who the heck am I and what you can expect from this channel. So I'm Joe Martin. I've been in residential real estate and the ancillaries around title and mortgage for over the past 12 years now. I've been dealt with some commercial, dealt with some residential, dealt with leadership, brokerage primarily, finance and operations, also the attraction of talent, business coaching, consulting, top agents, specifically in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia over that 12-year span. And I finally felt it was necessary to jump off the cliff and build the plane as we're falling, around just having a content-driven YouTube channel to educate everybody that turns in. And I think there's a lot of misinformation, but also more or less like there's a lot of people that like to make complicated stuff even more complicated. And the goal of this channel is really, some of it will be market data and industry within real estate. Some of it will be leadership. Some of it will be recruiting tactics. Some of it will just be like what's out there in wealth building. So it depends where I feel that week to really add value. But for the most part, I really like data analytics, and I also really help people attain their goals. So I really enjoy the leadership and influence part of the real estate industry. So here we go with this one. I thought we'd kick off just, hey, there's a court case out there right now where, now let me just pull up the real information on here. So biggest headline just came out a couple hours ago was the Supreme Court denies the NAR's appeal request in the DOJ. So yeah, most of the time you're going to hear me with data and what does that mean and leadership of people and how to grow a business, anywhere from budgets and whatnot. But, better start with like what just hit the headlines, because this entire real estate industry has been under attack, primarily from just getting transparency. And it seems that the DOJ has an agenda, and I think that agenda is consumer protection, but also antitrust and increasing competition so that people have clarity. And I think right, wrong, and different, we're at this place, and I think it's important to have knowledge and education so people can make their own decisions on that. So let's dive into this whole case here. So I think the real estate industry at large has had a bullseye on its back, and maybe we deserve that, maybe we don't, but that's where our current bet is. So let's get just some background. I think the big part here is just realizing that there's big changes coming, that how homes are bought and sold in America, and there's a legal battle between National Association of Realtors, and the Department of Justice is shaking up that real estate world. And it could impact how much, as a consumer you pay and how agents work with you. What does that look like compensation-wise? What's that look like as an agent, fiduciary? What's that engagement relationship look like? And, let's just go through some of that. So what's the background? What's happening here? So who's actually involved in this whole lawsuit? The National Association of Realtors is the largest trade group for real estate professionals, setting rules for how agents work together through an MLS. If you don't know what an MLS is, it's the multiple listing services. It's usually the first point of entry for any type of new listing coming to the market, and then they syndicate or push to Zillow, Realtor.com, any of those other apps. They're not the MLS. Typically, first information, the fastest is going to be in the multiple listing service. Each one of the territories that people live in, their neighborhoods, have an MLS specifically for the data of homes for sale in that market. The second person that's involved in this, or second entity rather, is the Department of Justice. Is I think everyone knows what the DOJ is. If you don't, Google it or ChatGPT it. The Department of Justice is challenging some of these rules that the National Association of Realtors and the MLS have, and arguing they may harm competition and consumers. We'll get into that a little bit later. So the origin of the dispute comes from 2020. The DOJ launched an investigation into NAR's practices following two main rules. They were really focused in 2020 around NAR's participation rule and the clear cooperation rule. So let's start with the participation rule. This requires sellers to offer compensation to buyer agents as part of listings on the MLS. Now, this participation rule is now defunct due to the Sitzer-Burnett case, where they basically decoupled it and disallowed any type of advertising of cooperative compensation inside the MLS. You can no longer do that. So the participation rule that they were first investigating in NAR is now gone. Second one is clear cooperation rule. Requires agents to list properties on the MLS within 24 hours of marketing them publicly, limiting pocket listings. This is the big one that they're going at. There's a lot of heated debate about clear cooperation rule of having to put in the marketed listing within 24 hours. There's all kinds of, in my experience within the DMV, all kinds of feelings around should you not do it. I really think it comes down to the needs of the seller and your consumer, but my opinion of it will table. The DOJ initially reached a settlement with NAR, but backed out in 2021 to pursue a broader investigation. So they brought the investigation in 2020, 2021 came, and they pulled the lawsuit, citing that they wanted to have a broader investigation, that they felt their scope was too narrow, right? So what's happened now? NAR has filed an appeal to the Supreme Court to block the DOJ's push for further changes. So DOJ's come back and wants to investigate further into NAR. So NAR put an appeal to the Supreme Court to block the DOJ's push for further changes in their investigation, that now will go farther than just clear cooperation. If the Supreme Court declines the appeal, lower courts' ruling against NAR's policies could stand and potentially forcing significant changes to real estate practice across the country. Well, they declined the appeal. So key issues at stake. Agent compensation transparency. Today, sellers typically pay the commission for both their agents and buyer agent. Well, not typically anymore. Typically, the policy was kind of that, and now it's really shifted. The compensation, the offered compensation on the listing can no longer be the MLS, and now it's up for negotiation. How that really happens, a lot of different ways. Some of it could be paid directly by the buyer. Some could be paid through credits. There's a lot of different ways this is going. Inevitably, though, the funds have to come from the buyer. It's usually being funneled that way unless they're paying through closing costs. So there's a lot of gray area around how this is actually who's paying what. But through the listing agreements, typically you see a compensation agreement between the listing agent and the seller, and how that gets shared out across is what's kind of there. The whole goal behind the DOJ was to get transparency about who's getting paid what. And I think that's a fair thing. The DOJ argues that this setup hides costs from the buyers and limits their ability to negotiate. Yeah, so this is really about transparency and that commissions truly are negotiable. Pocket listings, that's the second one. So the first one was compensation transparency, that the DOJ is really hoping that through clarity of not having the MLS and then having disclosures to buyers and sellers and really reinforcing through all the media, the lawsuits, that everything is negotiable, which is how it always has been, right? It just always has been. They're bringing transparency to that through the documentation and making sure that buyer, the biggest push now is buyer rep agreements that clearly outweigh the agency relationship between the buyer agent and the buyer themselves, and how compensation is flowed, which I think is good for our industry. Pocket listings and fair cooperation. That's number two key areas at stake. Is the DOJ believes that clear cooperation restricts agents from marketing properties creatively and could disadvantage smaller agents or firms. Yeah, could not. Just depends. I think it all goes back to the consumer, and I think education and what the seller wants in that situation is really where the expertise of the agent's going to shine. And then number three is the consumer impact. The DOJ claims these rules keep commissions artificially high. Lowering or removing these requirements could allow buyers and sellers to negotiate more freely. I think we're dealing with a open market with capitalism, and over time it'll reset itself based on consumer demands. And I think the big piece here is that the DOJ is hoping and intending to protect consumers and their education and transparency about what's going on in real estate, because real estate is one of the most complicated transactions you're ever going to have, and you're probably going to do it maybe 3, 4, or 5 times in your life. So I think if you lead with what's best for the consumer, you'll be relevant and you'll always have a need, because the relationship in a highly emotional and highly financially driven, because it's usually one of our highest costs in life, is buying a home. So I think there's always going to be a need for an agent. And I think it's just redefining value, transparency, and what is actually you're being paid for as a real estate professional. Let's go for motivations. Why does the DOJ want to change? They're eliminating the participation rule. Sellers wouldn't be required to offer compensation to buyer agents, shifting negotiation transparency to the buyers and their agents. It's already happening. It's already done. So this part of the 2020 ruling that they're appealing is already defunct. Loosening restrictions on listings. The DOJ wants more flexibility for agents to market properties outside the MLS. So they're looking at it, and right, wrong, and different. The DOJ sees it is that if it has to go into the MLS, that it's forcing one point of distribution, and you don't want to have. There could be claiming some antitrust there, But the whole point here is that they want flexibility for the agents to make market properties outside the MLS in any which way that you could possibly in a free market be able to market that listing and find a potential buyer for your client. Increased competition. The DOJ argues these changes will foster competition among agents and reduce costs for consumers. So they're saying, hey, break up the participation rule, break up the clear cooperation rule, and by doing so, you'll have less of a conglomerate, which means there will be more competition, more ways to market the listing, which by doing so will open up the buyer pools, which will have reduced costs and also make a higher competition for the value of the agent. I can see that. I love competition. Competition, makes pressure. Pressure creates opportunities, and those that can perform what I've said get those opportunities. And I think that there needs to be competition, transparency, and openness around our industry, because if consumers can trust the industry, they have more knowledge, they have a better experience, and hence you'll get better returns. So those agents that are doing this already and really being a fiduciary and transparent to their clients are going to win more clients. What happens if the Supreme Court denies NAR's appeal? Well, let's go down that road. If the lower court decision stands, so they denied the appeal. If the Supreme Court declines the appeal, the rulings from lower courts likely favoring the DOJ will go into effect, which just could, operative word, could, end of the participation rule, already seen that. Clear cooperation rule overhaul. Agents could have more freedom to market properties outside the MLS, so that's up for right now. Mandatory reforms for NAR, meaning NAR may need to revise or remove additional policies deemed anti-competitive by the DOJ. So more to be seen on that one. So it's really going to be the agenda of the DOJ of what is deemed as anti-competitive and what they're really trying to clear up there. So right now the biggest one is clear cooperation, because participation rules already been taken care of through Sitzer Burnett. It's already changed. And most MLSs now and boards are putting those changes in to be compliant with that. Widespread industry impacts. What are these impacts for consumers? All right, so they deny the appeal. What goes on with NAR, DOJ, and consumers? Buyers may need to directly pay their agents' commissions, increasing transparency, but potentially adding upfront costs. What does that mean? It means that now it might not be rolled in as being paid from proceeds from the seller as a credit, and that the buyers might have to come to the table with a check to pay the commission for representation for their agent. That could hurt some affordability and the ability for a lot of buyers to have professional representation, because it is a cost, but then they would know what they're getting. They might hold their agent a little bit more accountable for professionalism. There's a lot of things happen there if someone's got to cut a check, because frankly, if you got to have dollars come out of your bank account, you're going to hold those dollars accountable, so it might actually cause some accountability up front to buyers. Sellers may have more flexibility in choosing how much they pay in commissions, and could also lead to savings on that. Well, you can there's a million ways to cut that one. You could say that great listing agent charging whatever their agreed upon negotiated price on it. They deem better marketing, they're more professional, they're going to bring all those buyers there. There's a million ways to look at this. I think over time the consumer is going to win that battle. What the consumer sees as valuable and what they're willing to pay is the beauty of capitalism and the free market. Is it really going to be the listing agent or the buyer agent or the brokers? I think the thing that they need to know is they need to be transparent. They need to be clear about what they're providing, what they're not providing, what they can expect, and really be a professional when it comes to the trade. You do those things and you provide a service to facilitate a very high price point and emotionally driven transaction that could potentially have all kinds of hiccups in it, from appraisal to inspections. There's always going to be a need for a human, especially when the deal is complex. It's just a matter of what is that, and it's always been kind of hard to define that as an agent, and I think it's going to come to fruition very quickly. The consumers are going to demand that, and they're going to dictate it. For agents, increased competition could lower commissions, could also raise commissions, right? It could do a lot of things. We don't really know until you go out there and start figuring out what does the consumer market need. Agents might need to justify their value more to clients, which could be harder for newer, less experienced agents. Novel idea. Final one is legal and financial precedent. Denial could set a precedent, open the door for additional lawsuits or regulatory scrutiny from real estate practices nationwide. Yes, this is a real concern. Because they denied the appeal, it's opening a door for additional lawsuits. I think NAR and brokerages and real estate, there's a target there, and how that spins out, I'm not really sure. But I think if you're doing the right thing by your consumers, you'll end up on the right side of it. Finally, it could encourage local and state governments to introduce more similar reforms to increase transparency and reduce costs. I think because of this floodgate of how it's felt like not everybody had transparency, that you're going to get a lot of government oversight to make sure that there's transparency. And I think that's the biggest part is the cost right, is the affordability right, and is there transparency for the consumers that are buying and selling real estate. Possible impacts for consumers, you got, for consumers, buyers and sellers, lower costs, more transparency, direct negotiation of commissions. We all kind of covered this throughout this video. On the negative side, buyers may face upfront costs for their agent services, which could affect affordability. I think the people that lose primarily are going to be buyers and buyer agents on this whole transparency, negotiation commissions, all this, because first-time home buyers have typically seen 40% of all home sales in the U.S. They're down to about 26%. And if you don't have home buyers going and buying homes, it affects a lot inside of what dictates the GDP for the U.S. economy. And I think this is a challenge on the negative side with what the DOJ is doing, which I think it needs to happen for evolution of our industry and just to make it more competitive and, increase the value of what our buyers and seller agents are actually doing. But this is going to be some challenges for how this is compensated for professional representation on the buy side. For real estate agents, more opportunities for innovative marketing direct commission agreements. Commissions are that we're not talking about commissions at all. I'm talking about how those are negotiated with buyers and sellers and what they do for that and what that is for each one of those agreements being negotiable. But this is going to create more of a blank canvas for getting creative about how you market those if clear cooperation is taken away. Or broken up or seen as less restrictive. And then on the commission side, this is really going to be an open market exercise about negotiating what your value is and what your consumer wants. And the negative side is you're going to have more competition, downward pressure on commissions, and challenges for new agents entering the market. But I think that if your consumers are always going to pay for something they see value in, and that's the hardest thing on a service, is that it's very commoditized at times, and it's hard to hold a service because it's more of an experience. So how do you think about your value propositions? How do you articulate what you do and really enhance the outcome for your consumers that nobody else can provide as a professional inside the real estate trade? In closing, this legal battle is far from over. Like, just because they lost the appeal doesn't mean there's going to be more appeals or different court cases. But if the Supreme Court declines the NAR appeal, which they did, the industry could face a massive shift from how commissions are structured to how agents market properties. Changes could impact buyers, sellers, and agents alike. Like we know, there's going to be disruption, there's going to be change, and whether it's the DOJ or a state lawsuit, whatever it may be, the big thing to understand is, what do you control, what don't you control? People are going to have to buy and sell homes. It's not a question at all. How the negotiated commissions go, how the transparency goes, is what's under scrutiny here. And should the DOJ win, or does NAR have a point? That's to be determined, but stay tuned for future updates on the market and these lawsuits. I'll keep you posted with videos on a weekly basis about what's going on and what I'm looking at as far as a real estate investor, real estate leader, real estate, everything under the sun real estate. So stay tuned for more updates from me. Give us a like, give me a follow, shoot some comments in the bottom of this video. If you got any other questions, happy to help.